Hi all, and welcome to another episode of the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show. I hope you all had a nice, pleasant day, given that it's Thanksgiving here in America, and the show is packed as normal with a mixture of pieces that will enlighten, cause introspection, and also pondering, and we'll also have a few laughs as well. Of course, we're now 24 hours away from the Jackasses Fight Club, more commonly known as Black Friday, where the masses are duped into thinking they're getting bargains for stuff they don't really need, but makes observers like me ask the question, if they can sell it that cheap tomorrow, what happened to the other 364 days? Save 30%, save 60%, how about save 100% and stay at home is my advice. Right. We have a piece before we go into the usual of news and views around the world, some sub-intel, some intel as well, and quite a few op-ed pieces. But the given in light of what today is, Thanksgiving, the rest of the world carries on like nothing happens. And the dick swinging contest of who is the world's richest person reared its ugly head this week, so I thought I'd focus on that. Claims that Bernhard Arnault, who has just bought out Tiffany's, which is another example of the large takeovers that this show had forecast, and him, Bezos and Gates are vying for the top position of the world's not richest, but the greediest bastard, if you ask me. The combined wealth of just those three, if it was taken off them and spent on eliminating global hunger, it would last for the next 11 years. The next four below them would eliminate global hunger for a further 10 years. So, just 7 people's wealth could feed everyone on the planet for the next 21 years. Ponder on that for a second. Whilst we in America, or most of us did, all stuffed our faces to excess today, there are still so many who don't even have one meal. Never mind excess on one day. And I know many of you who are listening to this show are struggling in varying ways, but spare a thought today for the many who have it far worse in life. We have a Thanksgiving meal on one specified day of the year, and regardless of the history of that day, there are billions of people waiting on their next meal. To them, every meal is a Thanksgiving. And it doesn't have to be this way. This planet itself produces enough food to feed 3 planets per year. And yet we have over half of the world starving. Now, whilst we didn't create the problem, we are certainly responsible or negligent in our actions to prevent that type of genocide by largely ignoring it. Some will say, well, I gave money to charities to solve the problem. And that in basic terms is a nice gesture. Except you didn't investigate the charities you were giving funds to. And they just collected your money and spent it on themselves. It's how it works. The world was told back in 1984 about the problems in Africa with Live Aid, and billions poured in, allegedly, to feed the Africans. But what has changed? Nothing. Where did the money go? The same billionaire scroungers and fake famous people like Geldof and Bono as well. one giant PR stunt to make them look and act normal, and the perception that they care to the rest of us. They're not, and they don't. All partying at a cost of thousands of dollars per night, fake socialites, whilst those thousands of dollars per night wasted on fake drizzle meals and expensive grape juice could feed an entire village for a whole year. Kanye West spends 150 million last year alone. That is more than the GDP of several countries. And yet people are signing up to his fake church to garner more money to feed his excessive greed-based lifestyle. He is about as genuine and real as Joel Osteen, preaching out prepared scripts, saying all the right words, while collecting vast millions of dollars off the people. That totally negates the so-called message he is alleging to spit out. The pair of them are about as fake as a glass eye. So just 7 people can eliminate global hunger for the next 21 years. 7 people. One of those 7 people we can easily stop their harvesting tactics, Jeff Bezos. But no, people like the convenience too much. I will just order off Amazon has become like a new meme. Go to your shops and buy the item you want and boycott Amazon altogether. That baldy freak alone could end global hunger for the next 3.5 years with his own money. Instead, he spends it on increasing his own power base. All just to say, I'm the richest man in the world. These people have no touch with reality, and it's on a par with receiving badges for killing people. It is and should be a hall of shame, not a badge of honour. This next sentence or paragraph, if it doesn't hit home the reality of it, it never will. The average person spends around $125 a day. Some spend more, some spend less. But $125 a day is around the average. And this is your total spending on items such as mortgages or rent, food, energy and other expenses. But if Jeff Bezos spent the same $125 a day out of his current fortune, that would last him 880 million days before he ran out, or 2.4 million years. With this being Thanksgiving Day and being thankful for what you have, this piece of shit has that amount, whilst many have nothing. Ponder on that again. If Bezos spent the same $125 a day, his current fortune would last him 880 million days, or 2.4 million years. Jeff Bezos, the world's self-serving, greediest bastard award. Put that on your mantelpieces. Bezos, Gates, Arnold and Buffett. The irony that Buffett has 86 billion and yet won't give a massive chunk of it away so billions can have a buffet is not lost on me, and more importantly, should not be lost on you also. Need, not greed, is the people's ideal going forward. People acting real and in reality land, not fake vacuous bastards living in the city of light world where no problems exist. They exist everywhere. And it is our duty as humans to correct all the world's ills, and we won't do that in service to self. Correct your thinking, your own perspective, and your own responsibility in these matters, and your roles to correct it going forward. But you know what? Nothing else matters. Hi all and welcome back. Right, let's get into the show. I hope that made all of you think. Buying from Amazon is like buying your own death insurance. You know, we've covered in the Clowns in Panic show, if you want to find out what Amazon are really up to, apart from their spying gadgets and drones and all kinds of other stuff that they're creating. They're trying to create one giant supermarket where you can only buy off them. This is what the decentralization is. Get rid of all the banks, don't need them with fresh air tokens. Get rid of all the small shops in the high street, don't need them. You can just go and order it and be delivered by your drones. Mechanical world for mechanical people. Is that what you want? Fine, you can stay in the Westgate then. One small item before we get into the news. Sadly, this week, more of my time and more of the admin's time has been wasted on people not acting in the right manner. And as always, it's just a few who spoil it for the rest of the group. But the stupidity of what had and has gone on in that group left me and the admins with no alternative but to shut it down. So the THI Florida group has now been closed and removed from the register as a recognised THI group. And no, it was not taken lightly or a hasty decision either. Ongoing investigations into the antics and various allegations that came out of that group has gone on since early summer, and it saddens me no end that people, despite being taught in a better way, will still fall and slide down the easier path of the dark and the old failed system of harvesting aligned with self-serving greed and not need. You know, I put a lot of time into THI, not only the shows, but the trust and everything else, and to observe the antics of that group and how it upset so many people does not really sit too well with me. It just doesn't. So a new Florida group will be created when the time is right. But it's beyond disappointing in the extreme, I have to say. Right, let's get into some news. The UK has been called an illegal colonial occupier by the island of Mauritius after it ignored a deadline to return control of an overseas territory to the island nation. Now, the UN had given the UK 6 months to give up control of the Chagos Islands, but that period has now passed. Now, Mauritius says it was forced to trade the small island in the Indian Ocean in 1965 for independence. They've done that to a lot of islands. Hello, Hawaii. And the UK has claimed that it does not recognise Mauritius's claim to sovereignty. Perhaps we should arrange for the UK to be the only nation that's not sovereign in the future, if that's the way they're going to treat people. Britain's Foreign and Commonwealth Office insists that it has every right to hold on to the islands, one of which, Diego Garcia, now you know why, is home to a US military airbase. Go figure. And the UK has no doubt as to our sovereignty over the British Indian Ocean territory, which has been under continuous British sovereignty since 1814, the island minister said in a statement. Mauritius has never held sovereignty over the BIOT, and the UK does not recognise its claim, but Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn said it was important to retain the islands as a symbol of the way in which we wish to behave in international law. All islands should be made sovereign and all military thrown off them. You know, islands are going to be a big centre of debate going forward, because the majority of people have no idea how many islands there are. You know, everyone's heard of the holiday destinations like Tenerife or whatever, and even Hawaii, you know. But there's tens of thousands of small islands all around the planet. You know, Japan alone has 6,500 islands, just Japan. And a lot of these islands have been used for heinous experimentation done by the military, and the majority of them are military based. Those islands all have to be turned over as a sovereign nation unto themselves, not at the behest of so-called superpowers and various other former control system countries, in my opinion. Russia's alleged new, it says, Vostochny Space Center has lost at least 11 billion rubles, which is about $172 million. They're a bit like the DOD then. They just lose stuff. Perhaps not as much as 23.5 trillion that the DOD just happened to lose. Was you know, what's 23.5 trillion? It's easy to lose it, isn't it? You know, it falls down the couch and whatnot. Anyway, Russia is complaining that 172 million went missing through theft, and the top officials have been jailed, according to this report. So what went wrong with President Vladimir Putin's pet project, as it was called? Well, Russia's Federal Investigative Committee says it's handling 12 or more criminal cases linked to theft in this mega project, which Mr. Putin sees as a strategic priority for Russia because of its huge commercial potential. Now, the longest jail term handed down so far was 11.5 years for Yuri Kryzmin, who was the former head of state of the construction firm Del Spetsaroy, and Professor Mark Galeotti, a Russian expert at the Royal United Services Institute, told the BBC that the scandal highlighted the scale of corruption in Mr. Putin's huge state bureaucracy. How can you deal with it without declaring war on your own elite, he said. And he's not prepared to do that. No, because unfortunately he's in with them. And he said this dependency on mega projects almost invariably creates massive opportunities for embezzlement. That's why they create them. You know, the Russian and the US and India's got one and China's got one and a few others now, is a total distraction, period. And the reality is solely there as a way to siphon vast funds off the people to run their clandestine operations. Nothing more, nothing less. Most of the funding goes to the SSP. Oops. We're not building space programs. We already have them. We've had them for at least 50, if not 60 years. There is no future spacecraft. They already have them. Like I said, it's all an illusion. Some people also highlight this, more expenditure for the young people. That is completely unnecessary and another siphoning fund. But some people were enrolling in classes for the winter semester at Brigham Young University, Idaho, when they were hit with an unexpected roadblock. And the school, like many others, requires all students to have health coverage. But this month, the university made an unusual announcement and said it would no longer accept Medicaid. So Ms. Langston, who was 20, and her partner enrolled in the free government insurance program last year after becoming pregnant with the couple's daughter. Mr. Langston, 22, was planning to sign up for Medicaid in January, when it's set to expand in the state. To remain in school, they now would have to buy private coverage. And the cheapest option available is the university's student health plan. Of course it is. Which does not comply with the Affordable Care Act's consumer protections and would require the Langstons to pay $3,125 annual premium just to go to school. Now, in an email last week, you'll find out who's behind it all shortly, because they're involved in not only this story but the next one also. An email to its 19,000 students in Idaho. Nice little collection, that. 19,000 times roughly just over $3,000 a year. The university appeared to tie its decision to the Medicaid expansion, but it's not clear how many students currently have Medicaid coverage. But the state projects that about 2,400 more people in Mason County, where the school is, would enroll with the expansion, and the university warned that having too many students sign up for the public program would be impractical for the local medical community, an assertion a local hospital official rejects. Now, the policy change is likely to push more students into a health plan administered by Deseret Mutual Benefits Administration, which, like the university, and here is the kicker, is owned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Well, go figure. That plan limits annual benefits and doesn't cover birth control, provisions that would violate the Affordable Care Act, but for a little noticed Obama-era exemption for universities that fund their own health plans. Well, it would, wouldn't it? Why? Because most of the universities are run by Langley, is why. And this is a classic of let's make the rules up to fund certain specified groups. That's all this is. Church of the Latter-day Saints, which is a bollocks name for let's all worship Ra, child sacrifice and rituals. Why do they always seem to be at the forefront of far too many things that has a negative slant? Not content with that, the get involved in something else, as the next story will reveal. Utah Governor Gary Herbert has struck a deal to craft a revised rule that effectively bans conversion therapy on LGBTQ children. He said, "I've learned much through this process. The stories of youth who have endured these so-called therapies are heart-rending, and I'm grateful that we've found a way that will ban conversion therapy forever in our state." Now, conversion therapy is a widely discredited practice of attempting to change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity. It doesn't stop the certain manufacturers putting stuff in our food to actually do that, but there you go. And this has kind of been a hotly debated topic on Utah's Capitol Hill. Now, the LGBTQ rights and suicide prevention groups have urged a ban to help combat Utah's high youth suicide rate. But the day that the public comment period ended, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is a powerful influence in the legislature, raised objections to the proposed rule, and it argued that the rule did not properly address parental or religious rights. Personally, knowing how that religion and some parents act within that church, I don't think that they are the ideal bodies to represent the children, being honest. Their behaviours with children in that region and that church needs to be addressed, and quickly. Subpoenas have been issued to people with ties to President Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, and his associates indicate a broad federal investigation into possible money laundering, obstruction of justice, and campaign finance violations, and suggest that prosecutors are looking closely at the work of Mr. Giuliani himself, according to people who are familiar with the matter. Now, in recent weeks, prosecutors have sent subpoenas and other requests to potential witnesses seeking records and information related to Mr. Giuliani and also two of his associates. And the investigation, led by the Manhattan, no surprise, US Attorney's Office and the FBI, had already led to campaign finance charges against the associates Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, and the subpoenas offered the clearest indication yet that federal prosecutors are examining Mr. Giuliani's consulting work. Wonder how far it goes back. Wonder if it goes back to September the 11th. Maybe not. Now, amongst the entities named in the subpoenas are Giuliani Partners, a security consulting firm, don't you just love that term, which was founded by Mr. Giuliani in 2002, that had multiple foreign clients, including a city in Ukraine. Now, the subpoenas also sought information on a company co-founded by Mr. Parnas that paid Mr. Giuliani for business and also legal advice. Perhaps that's another potential HAF candidate. Remember how we said last year or early this year how that works? Hire, attention and fire. We'll see. Some sub-intel now, which tells you some of the issues that are building up and will likely get worse. As it stands, the budget is covering staff wages only, as I understand it. So all these so-called proposed bills that are going forward through the media for this billion and that billion is a pile of crap. No surprise there. But the House and Senate leaders have been thrashing out a deal on a short-term spending deal this past weekend. And yet again, a government shutdown looms, which was due today, which has been knocked back, as I understand it, until December the 20th. But nearly 2 months now into the new government fiscal year, remember the end of September is the end of the fiscal year for governments, and no progress has been made on any of the 12 annual spending bills. Why? Was they're all talking shit is why. Top and bottom line. Impeachment this, Russian collusion still ongoing, even though it's been proven rubbish. And who cares whether Trump, Clinton or anybody else colludes with the Russians? What is wrong with it? Can anybody tell me what is wrong with speaking to Russian people? Yeah. What is wrong with doing business with Russian people? None. This is the type of questions people forget to ask. Have we defined why speaking to Russian people is a problem? There is none. Like there was no Cold War. It's all an illusion. Now, this comes despite a hugely touted budget agreement hammered out between the White House and Congress this summer, which didn't go through. Why? Because certain people want to hold it up again and certain people want to block. Now, the House Democrats wanted to add roughly $7.5 billion for the Census Bureau. $7.5 billion. All they have to do is go to Langley or the NSA or Department of Homeland Security and they'll give them the census result. Why do we need people going into people's doors and spying? Because that's all they're doing. You're not telling me that Langley, the NSA and the clans out of Palo Alto don't know how many people are in this country. They've known for donkey's years. Because they spied on us all. So why do we need to spend $7.5 billion to count people? Again, people don't ask these questions. They also want to fund a military pay increase. Oh, it appears that $989 billion a year is not enough for the military. Really. Which is more than, roughly, if memory serves me correctly, more than 130 countries' GDP just on the military spending. And they also want to provide what it says, historically black colleges and universities with mandatory funding that has lapsed at the end of the fiscal year in September 2019. Well, I'm fine giving black people money. But can you imagine if Trump or anybody else decided we're going to spend $7.5 billion, roughly I think it was, for white-only colleges? The media would have a field day. Racist, racist, racist. Nazi. What's the difference? And they also wanted to address a $7.6 billion rescission in highway funds that will take effect in July 2020. It's unbelievable. So all of these have been completely ignored, and the treasonous media have done nothing to ask them what they're actually doing about it, given they're paid to do these things. Nothing. And this is why we really shouldn't bother listening to these politicians, and you need to ask the questions, what are you doing about the policies? Not whether Trump's racist, a pedo, speaks to Russians, etc., etc. That changes nothing, but policies change the people's lives. What are they doing? California Alleged Consumer Privacy Act is a new data privacy law that applies to certain businesses which collect personal information from California residents. Now, the new law goes into effect on January the 1st, 2020, and Google already offers data protection terms pursuant to the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe. Google offers data protection. Really? No. GoOgle offers spying techniques. And it says we are now also offering service provider terms under the CCPA, which will supplement those existing data protection terms, which was revised to reflect the CCPA. Now, no additional action is required to accept the service provider's terms if you've already agreed to the online data protection terms. And these service provider terms will be made available alongside new tools for partners to enable restricted data processing. And it is said that restricted data processing is intended to help advertisers, well, I never, and also partners to prepare for the CCPA. Please note that restricted data processing operates differently across our products, as where they hide behind clause 56, section 3, paragraph 9, subsection 26. And some products provided by GoOgle will automatically operate using restricted data processing, while action is required to enable restricted data processing for other products. And subject to the service provider terms, we will act as your CCPA service provider alongside GoOgle, it seems. With respect to data processed while restricted data processing. Have you ever heard such rubbish in all your life? Is enabled. And for those who wish to know, you can refer to this article for more information on restricted data processing and to determine whether restricted data processing meets your CCPA compliance needs. This was definitely written by a lawyer, because it's bollocks, all of it. But one thing, the reason I put that out is they seem to be rolling out an awful amount of regulation changes with Twitter, YouTube, and also phone companies following GoOgle, all changing their rules and regulations. And it's something that we have to be mindful of, and not something that we should be ignoring. For too long now we've ignored these fine prints and then complained after it was too late. Now, following our piece last week and previous news regarding Iran, this piece will come as no surprise to the THI listeners. At least 8 individuals with ties to the CIA, clowns in America, were arrested in Iran this week during protests over a fuel price hike. according to the country's official state news agency IRNA. And those detained had received CIA-funded training in various countries under the cover of becoming citizen journalists. And 6 were reportedly arrested attending street riots while carrying out CIA orders, while 2 others were apprehended as they were trying to send information abroad. Now, they had all received orders to attend protests and prepare reports, especially videos. And Iran's leader, Ali Khamenei, earlier blamed the protests on a grave extension and very dangerous conspiracy by the US to sow discord in Iran. Now, Khamenei released a statement on Wednesday thanking the Iranian people for quashing the chaos after pro-government demonstrations popped up to counter the protests over the fuel price rise. And Western politicians and media attempted to seize on the news of demonstrations, hoping that there may be a revolution in the works, but the situation has largely calmed down over the past few days. No surprise. This is a familiar CIA tactic in many countries to sow discord. They create diversions, create propaganda, and confuse the situation. And this whole nonsense in Iran is the CIA and their counterparts, because they've had their free or cheap oil program disrupted. That's what it's all about. Oil again. Iran won't allow them to do it. They won't allow them to go across their border either. It's the whole thing to do with Iran. Here's another piece. How are we doing for time? Okay. US immigration authorities created fake universities, lured foreign-born students to enroll, and then took large sums of their money before arresting and deporting them for immigration violations, according to a new report. And in recent months, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, has deported 90 students enrolled in a fake Michigan-based university. And as many as 250 people, mostly from India, have been arrested since January as part of the sting operation, which, according to the story, was concocted by federal agents. And the scammed students had arrived in the US legally on student visas, but when those were about to expire, they sought to extend them by enrolling in the University of Farmington, which was later revealed to be fake and front operated by ICE. I would say it's front operated by another 3-letter entity. And while the story has provoked outrage, with many quick to assume that the con job was a scheme conjured up by the Trump administration, the quote-unquote university was actually incorporated in January 2016 during Barack Obama's presidency, not Mr. Trump's. Oops. And has been staffed with undercover agents pretending to be college officials ever since. I can hear many of you brains, cogs, twisting now and turning, because you've heard this before. This was covered in From Russia with Love 7, and the antics, yet again, of the CIA. They'll blame ICE, but they're just another front company. You don't think they're not involved in and with ICE, do you? think again. Their tentacles are everywhere, and as the previous story revealed, it's not just in America either. What you got to remember is under the Education Act since 1948, the CIA have been profiling students globally and then bringing them to America for clandestine purposes. What this reveals to me is that maybe authorities are now finally onto it and actually dealing with it. And yes, the media will cry foul. It's what they do. They're stupid. But if I'm correct, this will help those students long term immensely, because the consequences of staying there and going into the Langley based programs were far worse than being deported, trust me. Two more stories before we go into the intel. This is something I warned about early on in the year, and it's getting worse. But in the American imagination, at least, the family farm still exists, but it has been declining for generations now. And the closing days of 2019, we now find small farms that are pummeled from every side, including a trade war, severe weather associated with climate change, tanking commodity prices related to globalization, political polarization, and corporate farming defined not only by a silo and a red barn, but technology and the efficiencies of scale. And according to this report, it's the worst crisis in decades. Chapter 12 farm bankruptcies were up 12% in the Midwest from July 2018 to June 2019, and they're up 50% in the Northwest. Tens of thousands have simply stopped farming, knowing that reorganisation through bankruptcy won't save them. And the nation has lost more than 100,000 farms between 2011 and 2018, and 12,000 of those between 2017 and 18 alone. Farm debt is currently at 416 billion. And is at an all-time high, and more than half the farmers have lost money every year since 2013, and lost more than $1,600 this year. Further, farm loan delinquencies are rising. Suicides in farming communities are happening with an alarming frequency. Like I said, I seem to remember warning about this before. Those clowns are decimating the food crop areas with fires, flooding, or other certain disasters, as we'll call them. And because of the non-compete policy of 1976, which allows the likes of Walmart and Amazon and these other giant corporations to determine who buys and who sells and at what price, the reality is for farmers is they are forced to sell the majority of their crops to groups like Walmart at below cost levels because of that non-compete act. Walmart are forcing, and several other groups are forcing the farmers to sell their crops to them at below cost price to the farmer, and you wonder why they're all going bust. Of course, this then creates another problem and another one of their policies called scarcity, which is another word to drive prices up and fill their pockets. And if people don't believe food is being made more scarce, take a trip into your local Walmart. They're pretty much the biggest store. Their shelves are empty and have been for over 12 months now. Products that all went onto one shelf are being dispersed onto several shelves to make them look full. Go and check for yourself. Products that were all in one aisle are now spread about several aisles just to fill up the shelves. And the other supermarket brands will be no different. They're pushing all the tins to the front so it looks like all the shelf is full, but it's empty. And then you go into the electronics department. It's all filled with old stock and out-of-date models. Why? Because no one is buying them. And this is what happens, it's the Ouroboros. If you keep taking money from people here and there and everywhere, eventually they run out of money and buying their stuff. And what you end up with is a load of people buying essentials only. Which is what's happening in Walmart. That's why they're downsizing from these giant superstores that sells everything to just food markets. Because that's all they're selling. Apart from the jackasses going and queuing up overnight in snow and sleet and rain to get some alleged bargain tomorrow morning. Essentially, long term, that people are only buying essentials in life will actually be a good thing. So we can end this materialistic nonsense that's driving us all into a debt cycle, of which many don't come out of. But we do have the potential of a national food crisis in this country looming unless this is addressed quickly. Should the trust not be blocked, we will endeavour to fix this problem once and for all. We will grow our own. We will manufacture our own. So we don't need other countries. Embattled UK banknote printer, De La Rue, which is Rothschild's owned, and a further example of what this show has been telling you for a long time now. All these so-called elites are now being burned badly in their own pockets. Now, De La Rue, whose new management, but it's still owned by Rothschilds, is led by CEO Clive Vacher, warned the company's $171 million debt pile is now up a whopping $63 million. Pounds, sorry. £171 million, which is roughly just over $200 million. And it's increased by £63 million, which is roughly $85 million. And it meant it could breach its banking covenants, nice word there, to bind. If trade continues to worsen, costs are not slashed, and the business fails to get paid on time, and as a result, as part of its latest quarterly results, in which the company, with the ironic ticker DLAR, reported a 15% drop in revenue and also a $12 million loss. £12 million, not dollars, sorry. And the new CEO announced plans for a radical review and had scrapped the company's £26 million dividend to give the business some breathing space. Newsflash, you won't get any. And that sent its stock tumbling by as much as 25% earlier today and wiping nearly 70% of the company's value in 2019. The company is now valued at just £140 million, which is less than the money printer's total debt. Don't you just love it? I do anyway. Now, De La Rue's latest troubles come after a torrid year for the company, during which the Serious Fraud Squad opened up an investigation into the business, which is still ongoing, following allegations of suspected corruption in related to currency printing contract in Africa. I wonder where that came from. Now, ironically, the business also took an £18 million hit due to uncollected sales from its top client, Venezuela, which has been on literal money printing spree in recent years. And after US sanctions came into force and it lost the contract to print British passports late last year, resulting in a very public row with the government. I wonder which group highlighted that also. Right, let's get into the intel. And if people still don't believe that the Rothschilds and clowns are struggling, perhaps this next piece will also give you food for thought. And the Rothschilds turned up in Moscow this week with their begging bowl. And they were begging the oligarchs in Russia for $300 billion and promising them that the ruble would be the new world's trade currency. And subsequently the Russians would be the new Federal Reserve. Wonder if that ever happened when, most Americans are not allowed to speak or deal or collude with the Russians. That's not going to turn out too well, is it? But I also wonder what China and Beijing are going to think of that decision, given they were promised to be the new Federal Reserve from 2013 onwards for the next 100 years. That was agreed as far back as 1910. Now, to do this, they were taking over Morgan's and other banks. However, to achieve this, they were coming to the trust for the money. I told you all of them have to come to us eventually. They have no option. But it will not be on their terms, but ours. TikTok. However, what is lost, forgotten, or mind wipe from these jackasses, and to use their own quote, jackasses, is the trust already holds all the liens against the Russian assets anyway. Oh dear. Next item. Alt media clowns, again pushing fake stories that Trump had been poisoned. Trump was not poisoned at all. He had a medical checkup appointment and was declared fine. Final intel item. The G Cloud and the GNA is getting closer and is currently having an effect on people, some good, some not so good. The ones who have done their own work will benefit greatly from this. The ones who haven't will struggle more than previously in this next phase. There will be no ifs or buts of whether you've done it or not. It will be revealed in ever more increasing ways. Now, I'm not going to denigrate people who haven't. Quite frankly, it's none of my business. That was their choice to do it or not. But all our members were warned of it as far back as May 2015 of what was coming. And the consequences of masks dropping and people will be able to see the real you is now upon us. 2020 vision will bring that even more focus. For those who have done their work, it is a time to beware. You must be on guard so that you do not fall victim to the spiritual envy-based targeting. You will be tested, but hold your ground. Males who never got in touch with their feminine aspect will struggle also, as they cling to a failed archetype. Females who have gone too far masculine will struggle also. Those groups will have to come back into the balance. We'll be back shortly. Hi all and welcome back. We're going to go into the op-ed pieces. Quite a varied bit, but a lot of them connected on one theme or another. And first thing I want to point out is I received an email in the past week or so saying greetings in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Well, the Lord was not Jesus or Christ for that matter. The Lord was Anu, the Draco reptile king. Sorry. You only have to read the scriptures and not follow them. Read them and understand them and grasp what is actually being stated. And whether you believe Jesus existed or not doesn't matter too much. But where was it in the messages that were attributed to him whereby he would take a title of a Lord? And then you have the Genesis scripture. The Lord came down and changed the people's languages and cast them around the earth so that they wouldn't coalesce together. A bitter and spiteful action. Does that sound like Jesus? Clearly not. A king is above a lord. Think, people. This, we've heard about the Langley and the universities and what's going on in the schools. Here's another example. It gets worse by the week. And the sooner we have charter schools that are taken out of the state systems and homeschooling, the better. Because the damage they're doing to the children, they're not teaching them to stick penises up each other's jacksies. It's blowjobs and all kinds of other rubbish. You know, it's beyond a joke. So this 16-year-old Colorado girl was violated by a sexually explicit role-playing assignment in school, where she was required to role-play rape and sodomy concepts whilst the teacher demanded she read out lines like "fucked in the ass" and other similar language. Now, most people will dismiss the reality of it because they cannot fathom it being real, but it is real. This is what's going on. And it just happened in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. The girl, Skylar, is 16 years old and attends the public school in Colorado, and her teacher required Skylar to role-play sexually explicit rape and sodomy scenarios in front of the class, where she was required to read out vulgar lines from a poem known as Howl, which includes explicit words and phrases like cunt and granite cock. Granite cock is a reference to obelisks and the penis of Osiris. Yes, that's Osiris's penis, the Washington Monument. And in another assignment, students were asked to review a song that talked about sexting and offering sexual favours to a teenager, and something that blindsided school officials when they found out about it from Kaysen. Now, some of the lines from the Howl poem, all required to be read by this 16-year-old girl, are, quote, "Let themselves be fucked in the arse by saintly motorcyclists and screamed with joy, a vision of ultimate cunt, and come eluding the last jism of consciousness," unquote. Quote, "Sweetened the snatches of a million girls trembling in the sunset," unquote, "who cut their wrists 3 times, successfully, unsuccessfully, who blew and were blown by those human seraphim, the sailors, caresses of Atlantic and Caribbean love." And you trust the school system? This is what this show have been teaching you all about. The very bastions of society that is supposed to look after us are the ones that are corrupting our children and damaging them. Whether it's hospitals, doctors, nurses, teachers, none of it's technically their fault, although there are some involved in this skullduggery deliberately. But the whole system, social services, child protection, governments, the police, they're all supposed to be looking after us. And yet, week after week, we hear more horrible stories about what's really going on. And we can't keep ignoring it and assuming because some clown in a white coat says we need to do this, that it's okay. Oh, the irony of the ones that they say are mentally unstable. What did he bring out? A white coat. Also from the Howl poem, and here are some of the snippets, further snippets, citing Moloch, the god of child sacrifice. Moloch, children screaming under the stairways. Moloch who entered my soul early. Moloch in whom I am consciousness without a body. Hello. Possession. Moloch who frightened me out of my natural ecstasy, Moloch whom I abandon, wake up in Moloch. Light streaming out of the sky, Moloch, Moloch, robot apartments, invisible suburbs, skeleton treasuries, blind capitals, demonic industries, spectral nations, invincible madhouses, granite cocks, monstrous bombs. They broke their backs, lifting Moloch to heaven. So what this person who wrote that Allen Ginsberg talks about Moloch, the child sacrifice demon, entering his soul. Moloch, in whom I am consciousness without a body. And he describes in this book this child sacrifice demon as light streaming out of the sky. This is reference to the illuminated ones again. It's the false light. Now, these are not merely twisted rantings of a madman, but rather the demon-infested screams of a human skin bag possessed by demonic spirits in desperate need of an exorcism. Allen Ginsberg, who wrote a number of disturbing things, this was just part of it, was also an avid follower of Tibetan Buddhism. Oh dear. And by the gist of his writing, he was involved in the tantric side of it, which you all heard about in From Russian with Love 8b. Ginsberg, born in New Jersey, lived in New York, born to Jewish parents. This next piece also confirms another of one of the From Russia with Love series. And I'm pleased to hear more and more people speaking out about this now. Because if you find out who is really to blame, not the false history, then we can go about correcting these issues. But it was said by a black person by the name of Thomas Sowell, who is an analyst of social studies, and confirms further the myths put out by so-called historians with regards to the slave trades. His story tells you it was only one colour or group of people. From Russia with Love tells a different story, and his quote was, "More whites were brought as slaves to North Africa than blacks brought to the United States or the 13 colonies as it was called back then." White slaves were being bought and sold in the Ottoman Empire decades after blacks were freed in the United States. Unquote. There was also a detailed story this week of how the Native Americans were being slaughtered in barbaric fashion. And yes, given it's Thanksgiving Day, that's not lost. In fairly large numbers. That was long before the whites arrived here, and long after also. Now, that is not to say that whites didn't do anything. They did. And the reason for this day, Thanksgiving, is because certain whites slaughtered a section of the Native Americans by poisoning their meal. But the Native Americans were killing their own kind in record numbers of fighting between the clans. Why is this history erased from our conscious and set out that only one group of people killed or enslaved anyone? I spent time this week, apart from dealing with stupidity in groups, trying to look for demographic figures. And a couple of points startled me on two counts. One, it appears the colour white is not classed as a colour anymore when looking for race statistics. It just gets left out. And two, the figures for white demographics are thin to non-existent via the internet anymore, past or present. And this is supportive of what I put out in the From Russia with Love series. The white race is rapidly being written out of the narrative on an alarming scale. And this, whether people believe it or not, is a major global issue. and is deliberately being suppressed on a massive scale also. Like I said in From Russia with Love, whites were 30% of the world demographic 100 years ago. It's now down to 12 and lowering, all within 100 years. And no one's saying anything. You know, imagine if it was an elephant or a tiger or worse, a bloody domesticated cat, given all the memes for those spies. If it suddenly went from 30% down to 12, there would be an outcry of save the whatever species. Why are the white people any different? And many will complain it's the white people mainly who are at the top of the wealth tree, and why should we care? But they are less than 1% of the white people. And eventually, to their horror, as they found out over the last few years, they were going to be eliminated as well. Oops. Next piece. Let's take a peek into some names that have arisen in the treasonous portal people media and the political circus realms, shall we? Just trying to keep the reps away. Maggie Lindsay Haberman is an American journalist. That's a laugh for a start. Journalist. Oh dear. There are no journalists. They're just Langley spies. She is a White House correspondent for the New York Times and also a political analyst for CNN. Not a good start. And she previously worked as a political reporter for the New York Post, the New York Daily News, and also Politico, and is the daughter of Clyde Haberman, who became a long-time journalist for the New York Times, and Nancy Haberman, whose maiden name was called Spies, I kid you not, who was a media communications executive at Rubenstein Associates. Now, in October 2016, 1 month before Mr. Trump won a race he was not designed to win, and Hillary lost a one-horse race in the presidential election, a document was released by WikiLeaks that showed that the Clinton campaign's use of Haberman to place sympathetic stories in Politico. Oops. And it said, quote, the Clinton campaign has a very good relationship with Maggie Haberman of Politico for over the last year. Now, Haberman married Darey Adashes Gregorian, who is Jewish, a reporter for the New York Daily Times, no surprise, which was formerly the New York Post. What you can see by that is the incestuous type intermarrying, and also prevalent in this story, how they all switch positions and make it look like it's a new post. Now they're just switching them around. New York Times, New York Daily Times, Politico, CNN, it just round and round. Maggie Haberman, born in New York, born to Jewish parents. Like I said, her mother's maiden name was the clue going forward for who Maggie Haberman really is. Nee Spies. Why? Because she works directly for the CIA. Oops. A new name that cropped up. Alexandra Semyon Vindman is a United States Army Lieutenant Colonel who serves as the Director for European Affairs for the United States National Security Council. Now, Vindman came to national attention in last month when he testified before the United States Congress regarding the Trump-Ukraine scandal. His identical twin brother, Yevgeny Vindman, is an Army Lieutenant Colonel and also a JAG officer who is assigned as an attorney also for the National Security Council, handling ethics issues. And we're talking about Russian collusion. Anyway, Mr. Vindman, born in Ukraine, born to Jewish parents. Nicholas Davis, who is the foreign editor of the Daily Mirror in the UK, had tipped off the Israeli embassy in London about Mordechai Vanunu. Now, Mr. Vanunu had given information about Israel's nuclear weapons program to the Sunday Times and later to the Sunday Mirror, which eventually led him to being arrested for telling the truth. That's what happens, you see. Now, at the time, the Sunday Mirror and its sibling newspaper Daily Mirror were owned by media magnate Robert Maxwell, who in this report says it was alleged to have had contacts with Israeli intelligence services, and according to Hirsch, Davis also worked for the Mossad. Well, I never. Vanunu was later lured by Mossad from London to Rome, kidnapped, returned to Israel and sentenced to 18 years in jail. Now, Davis and Maxwell published an anti-Vanunu story that was claimed by critics to be part of a disinformation campaign on behalf of the Israeli government. Mr. Maxwell, born to Jewish parents. Hi all and welcome back. Tears of a Clown, or Tears of Several Clowns, as we're going to out some more of their clandestine stuff that they've been up to in this next phase. And this is called HT Lingual, which was a secret project of the CIA to intercept mail destined for the Soviet Union and China that operated from 1952 and apparently was suspended in 1973, but you all know what that means. Now, it was originally known under the code name SR Pointer, and the project authority was changed in 1955 and then renamed. Now, early on, the CIA collected only the names and addresses appearing on the exterior of mailed items, and if you believe that, you'll believe anything. But later, they said, they were opened at the CIA facilities in Los Angeles and also, go figure, New York. Now, the program had the stated purposes of obtaining foreign intelligence, but it also targeted domestic peace and civil rights activists as well, and mailed to and from prominent individuals such as Bella Abzug, Bobby Fischer, Linus Pauling, John Steinbeck, Martin Luther King, Edward Albee and Hubert Humphrey, was opened during the course of the operation. It said a total of 28 million letters were examined and 215,000 were opened. You see, Big Brother was alive and kicking long before Orwell's 1984 book came out, or the internet. Next piece, Echelon, which is the main spying network for Five Eyes, which is now none. Their eyes got poked out. Now, originally it was a secret government code name and is a surveillance program, signals intelligence, SIGINT collection and Analysis Network, operated by the United States with the aid of 4 other signatory states to the UK-US Security Agreement, and that was Australia, Canada, New Zealand and the United Kingdom, like I said, also known as Five Eyes. Now, the Echelon program was created in the late 1960s. I believe it was earlier. To monitor, it is said, the military and diplomatic communications of the Soviet Union and its Eastern Bloc allies during the Cold War, which, as we all now know, is a load of nonsense. Essentially, it's just to spy on everyone. And it was formally established in 1971. Now, by the end of the 20th century, the system referred to as Echelon had evolved, no surprise, beyond its military and diplomatic origins into a global system for interception of private and commercial communications. In other words, all your phones. And was mass surveillance and also industrial espionage. Now, the former NSA employee Margaret Newsham claims that she worked on the configuration and installation of software that makes up the Echelon system while she was employed at Lockheed Martin from 1974 to 1984 in Sunnyvale, California, and also in Menwith Hill, England, in the UK. For those that don't know, that's in Yorkshire and has a number of very unpleasant ETs underneath that base. Now, at that time, according to Newsham, the codename Echelon was the NSA's term for the computer network itself. Lockheed called it P415. And the software programs were called Silkworth and Sire. And, quote, listen to this closely, a satellite named Vortex intercepted the communications. Remember I was talking last week about the lead paint? You're talking over 50, 60 years ago. Now, an image that is available on the internet of a fragment apparently torn from a job description shows Echelon listed along with several other code names, which is a global network of electronic spy stations that can eavesdrop on telephones, faxes, computers, etc. It can even track bank accounts. And this information is stored in Echelon computers, which can keep millions of records on individuals, all stored largely, though there are other server based in Utah. No surprise. When these records were about to be destroyed, the CIA purchased a garbage collection company to collect all the documents that were about to be destroyed. They're involved in anything and everything. And that's another tactic they use that the average person is completely unaware of. Agencies going through your trash. You know, what stupid half-ass retard is employed to do that, and why? You know, hi Johnny, what do you do for work? I go through people's trash cans. It's called the raccoon department. It's unbelievable. Anyway, the former NSA analyst Perry Felwak, under the pseudonym, oh, they love their pseudonyms, a bit like Larry Large and Barry Bigham, Winslow Peck, first blew the whistle on Echelon to ramparts back in 1972. and where he gave commentary revealing a global network of listening posts and his experiences whilst working there. Now, Felwak also included revelations such as the existence of nuclear weapons in Israel back in 1972. See how the stories connect? That's where Mr. Vanunu comes in. And also the widespread involvement of the CIA and NSA personnel in drugs and human smuggling. Oops. 1972 that was. People think human smuggling and child trafficking is a recent event. Oh no. This has been going on for decades. And it also highlighted CIA operatives leading nationalist Chinese Taiwan commandos in burning villages inside the PRC borders. Oops. Now, Echelon was also in all the Israeli embassies, for those who are new. It was crashed and burned, and that's why their embassies were closed. Oops. More revelations, this time in, but it brings up the same people again, same organisations again. This time it was in the UK, though. The British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, and the Communications Security Establishment spied on 2 British cabinet ministers back in 1983. The new US NSA spied on and intercepted the calls of Diana, the Prince of Wales, right up until she died in a staged car crash in Paris with Dodi Al-Fayed. Now, the NSA currently holds 1,056 pages of classified information about Princess Diana. Why have the NSA got it? What has America got to do with what happened to a British royal? You see, they hold all the information because they spy on Britain, Britain spies on America, Russia spies on America, and Americans spy on Russia, and they all pass the information round. That's exactly what Five Eyes and Echelon was all about. To get round country laws of not being allowed to spy on your own people, they just created a network and they all spied on each other. But they're not spying on political and military and government. It's the people. So, 1,056 pages on Princess Diana, which has been classified as top secret, because their disclosure, quote, could reasonably be expected to cause exceptionally grave damage to the national security. Now, according to reports, the damage would not be caused by the information about Diana, which is a complete and utter lie, but because the documents, it said, would disclose sources and methods of US intelligence gathering. Yeah, because they're gathering stuff for GCHQ and MI5, MI6. That's what they're doing. So it gets around the laws of that country. Now, an official insisted that the references to Diana in intercepted conversations were, quote, incidental, unquote, and that she was never a target of the NSA eavesdropping, which is a complete and utter lie. Because it said they were listening to her right up until the time she died. Now, UK agents monitored the conversations of the 7th Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan. and US agents gathered detailed biometric information on the 8th Secretary General of the United States, Ban Ki-moon. So it's not just us there spying on. And in the early 1990s, the NSA intercepted the communications between the European aerospace company Airbus and the Saudi Arabian national airline. So they use it for commercial espionage. And in 1994, Airbus lost a $6 billion contract with Saudi Arabia after the NSA, acting as a whistleblower, reported that the Airbus officials had been bribing Saudi officials to secure the contract. No surprise there. And as a result, the American aerospace company McDonnell Douglas, which is now part of Boeing, won the multi-billion-dollar contract instead of Airbus. It goes on. The American defense contractor Raytheon won a $1.3 billion contract with the government of Brazil to monitor the Amazon rainforest after the CIA, again acting as a whistleblower, reported that Raytheon's French competitor Thomson Alcatel had been paying bribes to get the contract. Why do you need 1.3 billion to monitor the Amazon rainforest? Has anyone asked that question? Clearly it's not for the benefit of the Amazon rainforest, is it? And also revealed in the same document, in order to boost America's position in trade negotiations with the then Japanese Trade Minister Ryutaro Hashimoto, in 1995 the CIA again eavesdropped on the conversations between Japanese bureaucrats and executives of the car manufacturers Toyota and Nissan. Oh dear. This is all to keep the same corporations running and funded. That's what it's all about. The Halliburtons and the Bechtel and the Lockheed Martins and the Raytheons. They get all the funds and all the contracts. And if someone dares to give it to somebody else, in steps the NSA, in steps the CIA. In steps MI5, MI6, in steps the KGB, and in steps Pine Gap, notwithstanding Mossad also. It's a giant corruption. And here's some more. The family jewels, as it's called, is the informal name used to refer to a set of reports that detail activities that were conducted by the CIA, which was considered illegal or inappropriate, and these actions were conducted over the span of decades, from the 1950s through to the mid-1970s. And William Colby, who was the CIA director in the mid-70s, and helped in the compilation of the reports, dubbed them the skeletons in the CIA closet. Now, most of these documents were publicly released in June of 2007 after more than 3 decades of secrecy, and the non-governmental National Security Archive, NGO, filed a FOIA request 15 years earlier. Now, according to the family jewels document released, members of the American Mafia were involved in CIA attempts to assassinate Cuban leader Fidel Castro, and the documents showed that the CIA recruited Robert Maheu, who is an FBI agent, to aid Howard Hughes in Las Vegas to approach Johnny Rosselli under the pretense of presenting international corporations that wanted Castro dead due to lost gambling interests. Now, Rosselli then introduced Maffeo to mobster leaders Sam Giancana and Santo Trafficante Jr., supplied with 6 poison pills from the CIA. Giancana and Trafficante tried unsuccessfully to have people place the poison in Castro's food. It's unbelievable, isn't it? It's a whole new world. But that world is now being revealed at a record pace. But one must question, is it family jewels, as in diamonds and sapphires, or family jewels, as in Hebrew Zionist gods? Because that's where it stems from. Oscar Ceborrora, who's working at Los Alamos, New Mexico, at the time of the Manhattan Project, and scientists were labouring allegedly to beat their Nazi counterparts in the race for an atomic weapon, and then passed sensitive information, it was said, to Soviet agents who knew exactly what was going on anyway, because the KGB and the CIA and the OSS were all working together before, during and after the war. Now, according to an article titled "On the Trail of the Fourth Soviet Spy at Los Alamos," and in the current issue of the CIA journal Studies in Intelligence, it was said that all of the children gravitated towards the Communist Party USA. In fact, the Ceborrora family was part of a network of people connected to Soviet intelligence. Now, Max was brought into the communist movement by his Cornell friend Gibby Needleman, and he was a teacher for a number of years before going to work for Needleman's law firm. And his first wife's sister, Rose Bagel Aronell, was married to Louis Aronell, who was implicated in the KGB plot to kill Leon Trotsky. See how they're all connected? Oh, those nasty Russians again. Except Oscar Ceborrora was born in Ohio and born to Jewish parents. Oh my. Communism is not and never was Russian or Chinese. It's Zionist Jewish. So, having delved into the world of spying clowns, let's now delve into the incestuous world of banking, shall we? You're probably going to need a piece of paper, or perhaps you can, when I post this on my Patreon, you'll be able to get your head round it. We're going to repeat an awful lot of names in this next section before the music break. Oh no, it's a bit further down. Anyway, the world's largest companies are now Bank of America, JP Morgan, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. So who are behind these groups? You're going to hear a lot of repeat names. The Bank of America and the groups behind it is State Street Corporation, the Vanguard Group, BlackRock, FMR, which is Fidelity, which owned the birth certificates, stocks, Paulson, JP Morgan, T. Rowe, Capital World Investors, AXA, Bank of New York Mellon. That is who is behind the Bank of America. JP Morgan, State Street Corp, Vanguard Group, BlackRock, FMR, which are all part of Bank of America, T. Rowe also, AXA, Capital World Investor, Capital Research Global Investor, Northern Trust Corporation, and also the Bank of Mellon. Citigroup, State Street Corporation, Vanguard Group, BlackRock, Paulson, FMR, Capital World Investor, JP Morgan, Northern Trust Corporation, Fairholme Capital Management, and also the Bank of New York Mellon. Wells Fargo, Berkshire Hathaway, FMR, State Street, Vanguard Group, Capital World Investors, BlackRock, Wellington Management, AXA, T. Rowe, and Davis Selected Advisors. So what we can see now, there appears to be a nucleus present in all banks of State Street Corporation, the Vanguard Group, BlackRock, and FMR, which is Fidelity Investments. Goldman Sachs, the Big Four, Wellington, Capital World Investors, AXA, Massachusetts Financial Services, and T. Rowe again. Morgan Stanley, Big Four again, which is State Street, Vanguard, BlackRock, and FMR. And then you add in Mitsubishi UFJ, Franklin Resources, AXA, T. Rowe, Bank of New York Mellon, and Jennison Associates. Bank of New York Mellon, again the Big Four, Davis Selected, Massachusetts Financial Services again, Capital Research Global Investor, Dodge, Cox, Southeastern Asset Management, along with the Big Four again. State Street Corporation is one of the Big Four, is supported by Massachusetts Financial Services, Capital Research Global Investor, Barrow Hanley, GE, Putnam Investments, and also the Big Four, because they're all shareholders of themselves. BlackRock, another of the Big Four, PNC, Barclays, ECIC. Who is behind the PNC? FMR again, BlackRock again, State Street again, and behind Barclays, BlackRock. Now the US government contracted with BlackRock to help clean up after the financial meltdown of 2008, and if you believe that, you'll believe anything. A smart decision that, to make one of the leading reasons behind the meltdown to try and fix the mess they played a large role in creating. Absolutely brilliant decision making that by the US government. Not. BlackRock is related to Blackwater, Black Trust, Black Dragon, etc. It's part of the color-coded program again, and is ran by Larry Fink. Lives in New York, born to Jewish parents. In short, the 8 largest US financial companies, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, US Bank Corp, Bank of New York Mellon, and Morgan Stanley, are 100% controlled by 10 shareholders. And there are 4 companies always present in all decisions: BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and Fidelity. Now, in addition, the Federal Reserve is comprised of 12 banks, represented by a board of just 7 people, which comprises of representatives of BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and Fidelity. In short, the Federal Reserve is controlled by 4 large private companies: BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and Fidelity, and these companies control US monetary policy and the world without any control or democratic choice. These companies launched and participated in the current worldwide economic crisis and managed to become even more enriched by doing so. So to finish, you think that was bad enough? a look at some of the companies that are also controlled by this Big Four group. Alcoa Inc., Altria Group Inc., American International Group Inc., AT&T, Boeing, Caterpillar, Coca-Cola, DuPont, ExxonMobil, General Electric, General Motors, Hewlett-Packard, Home Depot, Honeywell International, Intel Corp, International Business Machines Corp, Johnson & Johnson, JP Morgan Chase & Company, McDonald's, Merck & Company, Microsoft, 3M Company, Pfizer Inc., Procter & Gamble, United Technologies, Verizon and Walmart. Plus Time Warner, Walt Disney, Viacom, Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation, which is Sky, the CBS Corporation and the NBC Universal. The same Big Four control the vast majority of European companies counted on the stock exchange, and in addition, all these people run the large financial institutions such as the IMF, the European Central Bank, the World Bank, and were trained and remain employees of the Big Four that form them. We'll have a test on that tomorrow to see how much you remembered. This is what we're attempting to change via the People's Club and the Trust going forward. These vast networks of siphoning harvesters has got to be stopped by promoting a new model based not on greed that all of these core pirates operate under, but based on a cooperative model where all have their say, pay and profits are spread far more fairly than is currently. An end to expensive and greedy CEOs, middle management, brokers and backhand dealers. Those people took all the money and left everyone else with a bare minimum of scraps. The TPC, the People's Club, has to create our brand that is not necessarily monetary based, but people based. All the people. The Fair Share Group will be our foundation, alongside need, not greed, and put an end to this capital-based greed harvesting system where everything goes to the few and nothing or little else is left for the all. We have to change that, and we've made giant progress doing so. 2 more pieces before we have a music break. For the 4th year in a row now, the life expectancy of Americans has declined. Males is 76 years of age and females 81 years of age. And according to the report, the difference is not clearly understood. But it is a marked contrast to 100 years ago, as life expectancy was just 39 years of age. But given another of their genocide programs, of which there were several between 1914 and 1923, where millions of Russians, Slavs, Aryans, Armenians, Native and Black Americans were slaughtered. Not to mention a vast volume of white people also. European. And then you throw in the Spanish flu, which killed another 50 million, including 675,000 Americans. And at that point, age expectancy looked bleak. But age has slowly recovered. And it had to, just after the First World War, because the Illuminati folk and these banksters that I've just mentioned and the former trustee had planned the Second World War in 1923. Yes, you heard that right. And so the average ages of the people went up to 51 and 55, respectively. But the biggest rise in deaths has been drug abuse via opioids, meth and fentanyl, followed by flu and pneumonia. Of course, that will never be explained or revealed that they were caused by the increase in vaccines in that particular time period, because according to the portal people, that's all a conspiracy. No. And the third is an increase in suicides, which, whilst is understandable in many cases given the despair that has been created on this world, I wish more were made aware of the consequences of carrying out that act. The consequences are far worse than many of the situations they face in the physical world. Not something that should be practiced. Now, whilst life expectancy is on the decrease, death rates are increasing rapidly, and there has been a 6% increase in death rates amongst people of 25 through 64, and in young adults of 25 to 44, it's more like a 25% increase. Now, given America has a high population of elderly compared to many other countries, and this is a problem in China also, this will have long-term impacts for business, sustainability and pensions for the average American. And then you've got the likes of drugs being sold like Entyvio. No doubt many of you have seen it on the adverts on TV. What you won't have seen is the small print. That drug costs $3,300 a month. What the heck's in them? Gold? How could you justify it? It's just pure criminal, that type of expenditure and profit. Beggars belief. The real reason men live on average 5 years less than women is due to a serious ear infliction due to constant nagging. Final piece before we go into a music break. And a number of members have made me aware of the faceless clowns who are sending private messages to our members. But unlike them, you see, we don't advertise our show or the group. And unlike them, we don't chase after members to bump our numbers up either. Unlike them, we don't hide behind fake names. And unlike them, we are transparent. You see, these people who clearly have a mental health size issue, given their fake names, whilst labelling me tiny, which I'm more than happy to be. You see, as tiny man, I get lots of focus and attention from the large and the big group, who only have 56 members after 12 months of operating. Ooh, not very big or large, that is it. But that attention I get from them has led to a very large increase in our listeners, followers, and also my Patreon numbers this year. So I want to say thank you to all of them. Now, this is a group who has a pedo and child trafficker as their lead group member, I might add. I would sooner be called Tiny Man and Tiny Group than be associated with pedos and child traffickers. But it's all very groupie style behaviour to me. that people eat, sleep and drink all things Thomas all day, their whole lives just thinking of tiny me. I do say I have to admire their devotion to all things Thomas. So here is a song for the massive, gigantic, large, big, extensive and ginormous members of the hide and seek group. 12 months and counting now, chaps. Hi all and welcome back. Some progress that. 56 people in a year. Ooh, very large and big organisation that. Anyway, right, let's go on. What have we got left? We're speaking to some people about how things are going, and some are still convinced things are moving slowly, despite our show covering the sheer depth of the old system, and even listening to the piece earlier about all the various cogs and wheels and connections and dots of the banking system. And then when you add in so many people, some of which are bots or synths, or otherwise all propping up the failed system, the task kind of becomes heavier for the few delivering and trying to implement the change. It's a 16,500 year control system that has been smashed to smithereens in under 5 to 6 years. Why do you think the Rothschilds are going with their hands out to Moscow? Because they've had it all taken off them is why. To a point of which it will never return. Never. Many of their hidden worlds and entities crushed, and they will not be returning either. We have achieved so much, but much work is still to go. Now, some expressed the enormity of changing humanity and how far we have to go before the more visible external changes take place, which I do get to a point. But I reminded one group this week, they were looking at things from only one perspective or one angle, which is a common perception, and how we all have to retrain our brains to think and look in a different way. Now, the gist was we have a mountain to climb to wake people up, and also start the rebuilding phase, and it was perceived that we had to climb the proverbial Mount Everest. And too many can look at it in that way. But things go up, and things also come down. Now, the elites were all at the top of the mountain, and we were in the valley. But we're edging up that mountain. And given the circumstances, that is extraordinary in and of itself, and is, in my opinion, criminally overlooked or ignored by some, not only within our group, but outside. And much worse, also in the alt media in general, as to how far we've actually come. But this is a tendency of humanity, and why is it always a focus of people to complain, whine or moan of what hasn't been done, largely by others, notwithstanding whether they have reflected, have they done enough themselves? The focus is always what we have lost or not done, and don't recognise or realise what we do have or what we have done. But here's the kicker, and what people forget is they, the control system, are plummeting down the mountain at a far faster rate than we are climbing. Make no mistake about that. Once we pass them on the way up, that rise will increase dramatically in pace and elevation. Remember, perception is not a one-way street. I will end this show as we begun it with a period of reflection and introspection. No matter how bad we, mainly in the Western world, think we have it, it does literally pale into insignificance when measured against the rest of the world. Now, that is not said to make you feel guilty, but to balance your perspective on life and see beyond your own bubble world. Many have created for themselves, some refuse to let go of, and some have stepped outside of their bubble and are now rippling the world out of its slumber. I tend to think at times that our own members underestimate this group and what we're actually doing here. This is not a social group. It is a working group primarily. And that, I feel at times, is perhaps lost on some. Yes, I'm fine with having a laugh in the chat. I'm probably the worst for it. But I never started it. Michelle did. And comments on the Facebook. But I don't lose sight of what our purpose and goals are in and outside of this group. And remember, some of us don't have the luxury to just switch off. But sometimes there are times when I wonder, do people realise the amount of work, time and sacrifice that goes into what is known as THI? Notwithstanding the abuse, flack and game playing that goes on a far too regular basis. And the same applies to the work of the Trust. You've all been given a small sample of the real work of the Trust and the team. And I can assure you the real focus is not just on pieces of paper with numbers on them. It's vast in its scope. And yet for many, the Trust itself will be judged on when the funding comes out. But is that fair on those who are trying to deliver? When at the very least our regular THI listeners are all aware that it's much more to the Trust than funding. Essentially, the Trust is a high-stakes strategy game player, whereby all involved in it run the risk of losing their life on a daily basis. Again, something that in general is overlooked. As the desire of things, particularly in America, but the rest of the world is not that far behind either, that everything must happen today, tomorrow, or in 2 weeks. Without taking into account the varying levels, hurdles, clowns and beasts we face on an almost daily basis. And then we have the day-to-day life hurdles to overcome, the same as everybody else. And there's an old saying, never judge people unless you've walked in their shoes. I can assure you many would not walk in ours for too far. It's a world that's riddled with people and other entities treating you as some sort of target range, trying to oust you, kill you, or dupe you on a recurring basis. And yet all of this is done in the name of saving our species and attempting to drive the planet into a better shape and surroundings than it has been for tens of thousands of years. I will repeat again, THI is not a social group. We were tasked to drive humanity forward, along with Randy of Off Planet Radio and Alan of Circle of White Light. plus others who are welcome to join in with the envision of improving life for the betterment of all. Some people I spoke to this week, and previously, people have asked, why THI? My reply is, why not? Why are you thinking in limitation terms? Which other group of people would you give it to? Religious, governments, agencies, the military? Are they the perfect representations of our society? I'm sure you will all agree that none of those mentioned are. Otherwise we would have a better world, would we not? The reality is all of those elements contributed massively to the fall of humanity, so why would we ask them to do anything? How many other groups on the internet can say their lives have changed enormously since joining a group? How many other groups have learned the in-depth knowledge our group has? How many other groups focus on us, on our own role in the control system? Finger-pointing and blaming others only solves less than half of the problem. Only those three groups are aware there was a control system above the royals, the bloodlines, the deep states, and the think tank Bilderberger type groups. And you have over the years unlearned the lies you have been fed all of your life, and then began to learn more of the facts and the truth than any other groups. All of you by now have witnessed being in other groups, and you have seen for yourselves how far behind in terms of knowledge and understanding. It's as plain as night and day. Our goals are to keep it simple. Need, not greed. Service yourself to then be able to be service to others. Fairness, compassion, empathy, flexibility, and that oh so rare item called common sense. You see, none of this is rocket science, complex or difficult. Essentially, it's the basics of life. And we have to go back to the basics to start again. Everything else has failed. Repeating failure is for the realm of the RV people, the jackasses who took the carrots, not realising those carrots were not even real to begin with. I showed some people on Tuesday a path of life, and it's the letter N for Norman. The first line up is the left-hand path, but it has no gate or exit. Those on the top of that first line think they have reached the pinnacle. They think they are the illuminated ones. They are the gods known as the L-ites, or elites. But it is the false light they bathe in, and that light of theirs is dimming by the day now. They have a long fall. To get to the right-hand path, you have to slide down the middle, a steep descent. Here lies the sleepers and the majority of the alt media. And the reason I say that is that they're still following the lies that are spat out by clown agency-based groups and largely blaming something or someone else. neglecting the fact that despite being the 99%, they are somehow not responsible for the world's ills. Wrong thinking. Our group, Randy's and Alan's, have stripped away those lies, come off the downward descent and are climbing up the right-hand path. Our members are somewhere between a third and 3/4 of the way up that path, depending on the individual's ability to learn and understand the information. Now, some people have said we have to wait for the sleepers to catch up. There are 3 things wrong with that thinking. 1, how long did it take you to get where you are now? 2, do you think you yourself will stand still to allow them to catch up? And 3, if point 2 is correct, where are the pioneers or way showers to move forward going to come from? Do you think you're just going to stand still? For most of you on that path, no, you won't. You will go through the gate. The right-hand path, unlike the left-hand path, has an open gate for progression. Some of you one day will go through that gate and back to where you belong, amongst the spiritual worlds and out amongst the stars. As for the rest, they had the exact same opportunity as you. They failed to take it. And none of you are responsible for that, only themselves. Whilst they chose to point outside of themselves, we looked, embraced, and went inwards. The ending message is remember what you have, not what you haven't. Remember how far you have come and not focus how far you have to go. This was never a race, a sprint, or a dash. It is, and always was, a long-term project. That project will go beyond my time here, and many of you also. But we lay the foundations before putting up the walls and installing the roof. This has been the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show. My name's Thomas Williams. Enjoy the rest of your holiday, and bye for now.